Hello YouTube. First of all, apologies for not uploading so much recently. I've been away, so haven't had a chance to put together so many videos. Anyway, what I wanted to do in this video was talk briefly about something I mentioned in a recent video. So I recently uploaded a video where I took a quiz which was asking whether or not I believe in a necessary being. And I mentioned that I am an anti-realist about modal properties. I take it that basically there are no modal properties. In my view, the world just is the way it is. Modality arises as a feature of our models. It's not part of the world itself. So by modal properties, I mean necessity, possibility, contingency. When we make counterfactual claims, when we talk about ways the world could have been, when we try to imagine what could have happened if Hitler had won World War II, etc. This is modality, and this is the target of my anti-realism. Of course, I use modal language very liberally. I would provide a justification of this language in terms of its pragmatic utility rather than in terms of tracking modal facts. So I think this is a view which is not taken all that seriously, and I just wanted in this video to briefly, I guess, motivate it. I can't give anything like a sort of knockdown argument for it, but I want to just motivate it so that it at least has, so at least like let's put it on the table. So I mean, the first thing is to say that there's a general tendency in metaphysics that I want to resist, which is the tendency to explain the success of various practices by sort of postulating entities or properties of which the discourses associated with those practices provide true descriptions. I think that is generally a mistake, and I worry that talk of modal properties, modal facts, reifies what is a very useful discourse. And I guess there's a few things to say to sort of to just motivate this view. So one thing that I encounter is a worry that this kind of position is just going to be incoherent. So here's the worry. Let's take a claim like, I take a cup on the table in front of me, and I would say the cup could have failed to exist. And this means that it is possible that the cup does not exist. Now, since I deny that there are any modal properties, it looks like I'm committed to saying that this proposition is, strictly speaking, false. Because there is no property of possibility. So then it looks like what I have to say is it is not the case that it is possible that the cup does not exist. Now, the danger here, and this is where the seeming incoherence of being a kind of just global anti-realist about modal properties might come in. The danger here is that we usually think that by the logic of modal terms, the claim it is not possible that X just entails it is necessary that not X. So in saying it is not the case that it is possible that the cup does not exist, I seem to be saying it is necessary that the cup does exist. In denying that there are modal properties, it looks like I have to say, well, strictly speaking, it is not the case that it is possible that the cup does not exist. And similarly, strictly speaking, it is not the case that it is necessary that the cup exists. The cup's existence is neither possible nor necessary. The cup just is. It's neither possible nor necessary. But this, so the argument goes, this is just straightforwardly contradictory, because to deny that the existence of something is possible, or to deny that it's possible for something not to exist, just entails that it's necessary that it does exist. So that's the worry. Now I say, not so fast, okay? You can't bring a whole realm of modal properties into existence just from the logic of modal discourse. And so I think a useful analogy here is with error theory about moral properties, because actually moral properties have a very similar feature. So consider the following claim. Let's say, jaywalking is morally permissible. Well, if I'm a moral error theorist, I will deny that anything has the property of moral permissibility. So the moral error theorist will deny that jaywalking is morally permissible. She will say, it is not the case that jaywalking is morally permissible. But by the logic of moral terms, if you say it is not the case that X is permissible, well, this just entails that X is impermissible. And impermissibility is a moral property. You're just like, the error theorist wants to say it's not the case that X is permissible and it's not the case that X is impermissible, but that's just contradictory, because to say it's not the case that X is permissible just entails that X is permissible. Now, I think that in this case, the answer is kind of obvious, right? So when we are working within moral discourse, we do indeed apply these rules, right? So there's a rule that, yes, when you say that it's not the case that X is permissible, you can conclude that X is impermissible. But we need not work within moral discourse. And of course, even if we do work within moral discourse, we don't need to treat that as tracking moral properties. In other words, we don't need to sort of treat it as if we don't need to suppose that like there really are these properties of permissibility and impermissibility. We can view it as a useful fiction or something along those lines. So the point is that you only get that. So it is not the case that X is permissible is only going to sort of entail X is permissible if you adopt the moral perspective. But of course, you can step outside that perspective, and from talking outside that perspective, the statement "it is not the case that X is permissible" merely denies that X has a certain property and nothing more. I mean, so I think that in the case of error theory, that's pretty well accepted now. But if you don't buy that, here's another analogy, right? Suppose there's some society which is highly religious, and the people in that society sort all things and events into the sacred and the corrupt. So under their framework, they have this framework where like all things and all events are viewed as either sacred or corrupt. And under that framework, if you say it is not the case that X is sacred, this just logically entails X is corrupt. And if you say it is not the case that X is corrupt, this just logically entails X is sacred, just by the logic of that discourse. So the question is, are we all now committed to the existence of, divine properties of, sacredness and corruptness? Well, no, surely not. But so then I would say, look, from the mere fact that in modal discourse, it is not the case that X is possible entails X is necessary, that doesn't commit you to the existence of modal properties, because you can step outside that discourse, and the statement "it is not the case that X is possible" can be taken as just denying the property of possibility. So hopefully that deals with the incoherence worry. But why might we, is there anything that can be said to make this view at least intuitively plausible? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people still find it very strange, right? Still find it very bizarre to say that there are just no modal properties. I think there's a couple of again, I don't have like I don't have a clear argument for this position. Let me be clear, but I do have a couple of things that might make it just intuitively a bit more like acceptable. Like what at least motivates this a little bit. So here's one thought. There are a few philosophers who have defended Necessitarianism, and Necessitarianism is the view that there is only one way that the world could possibly be. So one way to defend Necessitarianism would be to hold that the initial conditions of the world could not have been otherwise. The initial conditions are just necessary. And then second, that all subsequent events are causally determined by prior events. So those two claims entail that there is only one possible world, because the initial conditions are necessary, and then all of the following events just follow from the initial conditions by, you know, they're causally determined by exceptionalist laws. All the following events. So it's like determinism combined with necessitarianism about initial conditions. Another way you can get to this sort of position might be to, you know, I mean, you could take the sort of view of someone like Leibniz. You might say that there is an omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent creator, and this creator has created the best of all possible worlds. And that was because this creator is omnipotent and omnibenevolent, and this creator necessarily exists. That's the only thing that could have happened, right? So again, there's only one way the world could have been. So the point is that if you are a necessitarian, then the correct answer, the true answer to you know, any question like, well, you know, could this thing have not existed, right? So you know, the cup on my table, could the cup have failed to exist? Well, the answer is no. That cup necessarily exists. Everything necessarily exists, and everything is necessarily the way that it is. Now, it seems to me that if you go in for this kind, for, you know, modal metaphysics, as it were, it seems to me that this isn't like a crazy position. I mean, it's worth taking seriously because, again, like, okay, the initial conditions of the world are necessary. Well, maybe. I mean, I'm not sure how you can just rule that out. Again, it doesn't seem crazy. And then the idea of determinism, the idea that all events are causally determined, that doesn't seem crazy. So I don't know. Necessitarianism doesn't seem to be a completely mad position, right? I mean, of course, we usually, you know, like intuitively, of course, it seems, yeah, the cup could have failed to exist, but you know, in order to imagine that fully, well, we don't imagine that fully, right? Like, it's not as though I'm imagining a whole universe from the very beginning, and it's not as though I know, you know, why the universe came into existence in the first place, or if it even came into existence, maybe it's eternal, but I don't know all of this stuff. So yeah, I mean, maybe there are gaps in our knowledge, and actually if we knew a bit more, maybe we would realize that, yeah, everything is just necessary. We would take necessitarianism seriously. The point is, if you go in for modal metaphysics, then I would say that necessitarianism isn't a crazy position. Now, suppose we accept necessitarianism. This, again, is going to have significant consequences for our view of what the modal facts are, because it's going to mean that, yeah, like the cup on the table, it turns out necessarily exists. Everything is necessary, nothing is possible. But would our modal discourse outside of the philosophy classroom change? I don't think so. I think that even if you accepted necessitarianism, then you know, if you were, I like talking about ways things could have been outside the philosophy classroom. I think that you would still act as if and talk as if the cup could have failed to exist. You know, you would still say things like, maybe somebody has put a cup on the table and they've put it there without a coaster, and you know, you could complain that they didn't have to do that, that you know, they could have done something different. They could have put a coaster down. You're like, you should have put a coaster down. You'd still say things like that, at least if you care about whether or not cups leave marks on the table. And the point is that, look, we would do this because we can imagine a bunch of fictional histories very similar to our own history in which the cup was never created. You know, we can sort of think like, okay, even if the cup had been created, we can imagine sort of fictional histories, again, very similar to our own history, where I do something different with the cup. And so with the cup on the table, I can similarly imagine taking the cup off the table. I can foresee no problems taking the cup off the table, etc. And so all of this means, all of this is sort of what grounds my claim, what makes it acceptable for me to claim that, you know, the cup could have failed to exist, or the cup could have been put somewhere other than the table. We kind of engage in this like imaginative activity where we imagine things in the world being duplicated or rearranged or removed. And this is a very useful capacity, and this makes it useful to conceive of things as if they could have been different. But of course, again, maybe necessitarianism is true, and in that case, these kinds of everyday modal judgments are no longer tracking the modal facts. They're no longer tracking the modal properties. Indeed, actually, even many everyday judgments of necessity wouldn't be tracking modal facts, because in everyday contexts, we only attribute a sort of restricted kind of necessity. I might say that something is necessitated by the physical facts or the biological facts or by a certain set of prior states. But those kind of physical, biological or prior states are themselves contingent. So, like if I say that there's, maybe I talk about how it's, necessarily the case that nothing can travel faster than light, right? But then I'm thinking of that in terms of there is a physical law preventing things from traveling faster than light, but maybe I'm conceiving of that physical law as itself contingent. Maybe I think there are other possible worlds where there are different physical laws. Again, if necessitarianism is true, then that's false. The point is that if necessitarianism is true, then I take it that modal discourse of the sort that we actually engage in our everyday lives, modal thinking, is going to be pragmatically justified. And then I would say, if I'm a modal anti-realist, I can use the same sort of justification. So again, that's one point that maybe makes modal anti-realism a little bit more intuitive. Another way to approach this is via, I guess, the use of via the use of idealization in the sciences. So, when we think about idealization in sciences, right? So let's take I don't know, the ideal gas law, right? I can imagine altering the temperature of a gas, and I can think about how this will alter the pressure. Will the canister containing the gas explode if I alter the temperature this much? Now, one thing that you might do when you're reasoning about this is to use the ideal gas law. That's an idealization. An ideal gas consists of a bunch of dimensionless molecules that interact. Dimensionless molecules that interact without any kind of friction. Obviously, nothing in our world is composed of anything like an ideal gas, and so obviously I'm in some sense imagining an alternative possible world. But the question then is like, okay, well, what would this world actually be like, right? I mean, so what would the world really be like if it contained dimensionless molecules? I would suggest that we have no idea, right? We have no idea whatsoever what that world would be like. So there's a kind of possibility claim here, right? Like when I'm imagining, so when I take a canister of gas and I'm imagining what would happen if I increase the temperature, and I'm saying, if I increase the temperature by this much would have happened, or if I had increased the temperature by this much would have happened. Okay, so in justifying that claim, or in working with that claim, maybe I use the ideal gas law. So the ideal gas law invokes a kind of possible thing, a possible world containing, there's this ideal gas of dimensionless molecules, but clearly we have no grasp on on how this would actually manifest. Like, what would a canister of this stuff actually be like? See, to me, this just seems it's not entirely obvious how it is that idealizations gain their pragmatic utility, right? Like, so there's a possibility claim here, and it's not obvious how it gains its pragmatic utility, but it's surely not going to be through tracking modal facts. Like, it's not that we are tracking facts about worlds where there are dimensionless molecules, right? So, maybe compare things like fine-tuning arguments in physics. If you accept the fine-tuning argument, then it will be the case that, I don't know, if the strong nuclear force was slightly greater while other constants remained the same, our universe would not exist. It would have collapsed shortly after the Big Bang. So from the point of view of fine-tuning arguments, if you slightly modify the initial conditions, then the universe as we know it just doesn't exist. Doesn't even exist. You don't get anything like this. Slight change in like fundamental forces, initial conditions, nothing like this even exists. So now you think about, well, how would things be if there were dimensionless particles? I mean, you have no idea. Like, how are you going to have any idea? It seems in this case, right, that we're not tracking facts about possible worlds where there are dimensionless particles. This seems more like, we are inventing a fiction, right? Like, that's how this appears to me. Now, again, exactly why is it that this kind of fictionalizing is so pragmatically useful, right? Why is it that it allows us to make, true predictions and to make powerful explanations for the phenomena we encounter? Well, that's a big question. But what I guess this point is just trying to illustrate is that it seems that, in this case, we gain a great deal of utility from a kind of modal discourse that it is very hard to conceive of that discourse as tracking the actual modal facts. I mean, it's not clear that there really are, that they're just, my suspicion here is, well, there just is no fact of the matter. There's no fact of the matter what the world would be like if things were composed of dimensionless molecules. Like if things were, you can elaborate on that fiction in basically whatever way you want. But there isn't actually any fact of the matter. And I think that in that case, even if you're not a global anti-realist about modality in the way that I want to be, I think it's plausible in that case to be an anti-realist about the modal claim involved. Hopefully this provides some illustration of modal anti-realism and why we might take modal anti-realism seriously. Again, I know that there's nothing even approaching a knockdown argument here. I just want to put this view on the table, and maybe this is worth considering. So that's the end of that. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.